I hope everybody is doing well. Just thought I would. I just took a picture of myself. I was just looking to maybe talk to you guys a little bit about what's going on, the fight game, answer any questions anybody has. Um, so I just wanted to do that. I'll get the chats up and get that rolling here. Um, let's see, what did I want to start with? UFC 249 looks like it is going to occur on May 9th. Um, I think maybe the best card that the UFC has ever put together, at least on paper, when you start and you look at it and you say on paper, there are so many good fights on that particular card. So I'm really enjoying thinking about watching that card. That should be a fantastic show. And I want to see that one pretty badly. Of course, the question is it going to happen with the pandemic going on and with all the regulators? I think, unlike the one last month in California, that this UFC show will get through. My guess now that some governors are starting to look to open their states up and have businesses reopen, that this will be something that people will be able to do. So I'm guessing that that is something that will go forward. If I had to guess, I would say the fight will be in Florida. Um, we'll see what happens, but the governor there has been very adamant about opening businesses. He kept his state open for as long as possible, a lot longer than almost anybody else, to much criticism before they made some restrictions. And then, of course, they said that the WWE was an essential business, which was hilarious. And they let that thing go forward. So I think that Florida would be the best bet that we would see for UFC 249. Let's see what else. I'll answer questions when they pop in. On Saturday on ESPN, if you're a boxing fan, there are going to be a bunch of great classic fights, including for the first time ever, as far as we know, all three of the Ali Frazier fights. They fought in 1971, 1974, and in 1975. Just a list of tremendous fights. All were so compelling, and those fights will all be on. They will end up on ESPN in prime time, so you can watch for that. There's a bunch of other good quality fights on. When might boxing return? I think June is a good time frame. I think people are going to start trying to get shows on as early as May. I think you'll see that, and then we will see what happens from there. But I think boxing is probably going to lag behind the UFC a little bit in terms of getting back. One of the reasons I think for that is the UFC has a lot more money that they can spend and willing to spend in a lot of the boxing promoters. And the boxing promoters really rely heavily on that gate revenue. So if you have a really big fight that you think is going to do a good gate, you don't want to put it on now where it's going to be behind closed doors and you're going to lose all the ticket buying public being at that. So I don't know that we'll ever get to a point this year where there's going to be big crowds anywhere, but I think they're going to hold off as long as they can to see if that happens. Losing that gate is going to be crippling to boxing promoters because, as I said, they rely on that so much. So boxing promoters work on a really thin margin, and it is very difficult for them to go and do. And for them to put on shows if they don't have that big pay gate, whereas UFC can do it, and they're used to running the pay per view. So I think that's the biggest difference that I see right now. Um, what do I think is going to be the good point coming out of the pandemic? Of course, all these lives lost and everything is terrible. But I think from a boxing standpoint, one of the things we might see is a change in the way people put the fights together. And I think that we'll see the fights that we want to see quicker. I think what's happened in the past is you see two guys like, let's say, Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence, and especially if they're with different promoters, it just takes so long to get them together, and you go through all these machinations, and are they ever going to fight? And it's just it's an old tired song that we hear over and over and over in the combat sports space. now when they come back, there's going to be such a lot of competition because the sports are all going to start coming back, in late summer and into the fall. And when that happens, there's going to be so much competition for the media attention, for your attention as fans, for television, because you're going to see, like, as an example, all the golf majors are now at the end of the year. Hockey's going to be in its playoffs. NBA is going to be in its playoffs. Major League Baseball will be kind of getting rolling. In the fall, obviously, football is going to start. Everything is going to be in a more condensed time frame, and so we're going to see all that happen. So I think boxing, in particular, they're not going to be able to get away with skipping some of these fights. Um, so I think it's going to be very interesting how this will work. But I think that's going to be one of the benefits of the new realities in the fight game, and that'll benefit you guys because you want to see these fights. You want to see the best fight the best more quickly than they do right now. I mean, I understand building a fight and getting it to a point where the people recognize both guys and you can maximize the amount of money. But I think a lot of times what happens is they go way past their expiration date. In my mind, it goes way too long, and to me, it's not good for the public. So to me, that's one thing that I think we will see that'll be a benefit out of it. The negative, I think the negative, this applies for MMA, for boxing, any combat sport coming back. What kind of shape are these guys going to be in? Especially the guys that are going to be fighting early, the fighters on UFC 249 on May 9th. They're able to do their conditioning. I've talked to a lot of fighters. They're doing treadmill stuff and maybe running in the area, but you can't do the kind of sparring and grappling and that kind of stuff that you do. If you were going to the gym every day and you had your training partners and you were doing that. So when you come back and you fight after having not been through that, what is the reality going to be? Is the MMA, are the boxers, is it going to be the same quality fights that we're used to? People's timing going to be off? Somebody like Terrence Crawford is a boxer whose timing is so critical to him. Is he going to have that? And will that affect him negatively? I think that's something that will be interesting to watch. And I think some guys are going to be better off than others. Maybe they worked, on things more in their garage. They maybe had a ring in their garage, and they were able to do some things and get that happening. But yeah, I think that it's really going to be different. I just got a comment from Africa who said it's crazy what's going on, and I agree. It's really sad. It's a public health crisis that we're in because this is so contagious, and it's putting so many people at risk. But it's also, I think it's going to be a while before we see to see this back to normal. That's really going to be the sad and difficult part about this. And I think there's going to be changes that are going to be long held. That in the way we watch sports. One thing when you go to sports and something happens, the team you're rooting for, the fighter you're rooting for, you high five your neighbors, the person next to you. Is that going to happen? I don't know. Are people going to be afraid to do that? Or are we going to limit physical contact? Are we going to limit how close we are to each other? Those are all questions that we don't know that's going to happen. Um, so, anyways, that's my thought on that. Um, I hope anybody, if you guys have any questions, I'm looking forward to seeing those. I hope you can pop a few questions in there for me. That would help me instead of me just sitting here rattling and droning on. Um, I really am trying my best. And if there's anybody you want me to interview, I've been doing a lot of interviews, both boxing figures and MMA figures. I'm going to be interviewing Dana White soon. Look forward to interviewing Brian Ortega of the UFC. How do I rate Chris Eubank Jr.? I hear Roy Jones is training him now. I think Eubank is a pretty good fighter. There's a lot of good fighters at 168, and I don't think he's in that upper echelon with David Benavidez, Callum Smith, Caleb Plant. I think he's a level down there. But I think Chris proves that he's got talent and he's going to be a factor. He's going to be a tough out for any of those guys. So I think he's a guy that, was going to win some big fights. He's going to surprise some people. Um, Roy Jones training him. I think Roy is a good trainer, but I think the thing with Roy is you need consistency. You need to be with Roy. Roy's style isn't something that, you just pick up like that and go. And I think if you're going to be with Roy, you have to make that commitment to be with him for a while and train with him. And it seems like, and I don't know if this is because of Roy or because of the fighters. I really haven't asked anybody, but Roy kind of will have a fighter, then he leaves them and goes to another fighter and goes around. And as a result, in my opinion, that makes it difficult for a fighter to pick up his style and add it and fight the way that Roy wants you to fight. I do think Roy is make a big difference for a fighter, but I think he needs to have a lot longer period of time with his fighters than what we have seen so far. Roy's kind of a celebrity, and a lot of times celebrities, they got a million things going on in their lives and don't necessarily want to commit to just going to the gym day after day after day. And also, like when Floyd Mayweather said he wanted to become a top trainer, it's not about you anymore. It becomes about the fighter, and you're talking about the fighter. And sometimes that's hard, for the biggest stars, Muhammad Ali and Floyd Mayweather and Oscar De La Hoya and fight Mike Tyson, fighters like that. Everything was about them, and all the conversation was about them. And it's difficult then, to transition and to now talk about somebody else all the time. I think Roy's had a little bit of difficulty with that. A lot of prominent fighters have had that problem, and that's something that is going to take a special person to overcome. It's happened, but it's not an easy thing to do. Let's see, what else do I want to talk about. I got some crazy stories if anybody wants to hear some stories. If not, maybe we'll wrap this up. I hope a question or two pops up. I'll keep yapping a little bit. I gave out an Amazon gift card yesterday, and I asked people. I said, "Hey, guess the name of one of my dogs. Guess my favorite athlete," and that was pretty easy. I posted that a million times. Who that is? Muhammad Ali. Um, but then I said, guess the first heavyweight title fight that I ever covered. And I never thought too many people would get that one, but a lot of people got it. Larry Holmes and Ronaldo Snipes. And that was 1981 in Pittsburgh. And what a fight it was. I mean, Ronaldo Snipes wasn't highly regarded. People were wondering how he got that title fight at the time. But he gave Larry Holmes, who was one of the best champions, not only of his era, but of all time. Larry, one of the great heavyweights who ever lived, he gave Larry Holmes a heck of a fight there. And so that was my first. I covered boxing and MMA for God a long, long time. My journey in MMA was a little different than in boxing. I was a boxing fan all my life. I grew up when I was a young boy. My dad took me to a fight when I was 6 years old, and I've been a fight fan. And of course I idolized Ali, and so that was it. Clarissa Shields versus Layla Ali. That is asked by Alien Society who wins. Well, I think it's Layla hasn't fought for so long, and I just don't think that she would be able to get herself in the kind of shape to really fight and beat somebody like Clarissa Shields, who is active, who's in the gym all the time, who is in terrific shape. And so I just don't think that Layla would be able to do it at her age and the amount of time away from the game she has. I think if they were contemporaries and they were in at the same time, boy, that's a different story. Layla could fight. Layla was a really good fighter, and I think that would have been a fight that I would have loved to have seen. Um, I'll have to watch some of Layla's fights again. I've got Shields more on my mind because I've seen her recently. But Layla is bigger than Clarissa, too. And that would have been a fight. I just think now if they fight, which I don't believe they will fight, by the way, I think it's a joke. So how are my negotiations with ESPN going to replace Dan Raphael? Nice one, Thunder Road. Dan is a friend, and I'm sorry to see that he lost his gig. And but he'll be back. That's the one thing. Dan is a talented guy, and he'll be back. So we know that will happen. Errol Spence Jr. versus Pacquiao. That's a fight that's being talked about. I think if Pacquiao comes back, my guess is his first fight is going to be Mikey Garcia. That would be my guess. What happens? You know, there's and that fight will probably end up being in the Middle East. That's somewhere I know that there's been a lot of interest in bringing Manny Pacquiao over there, and a fight with Mikey Garcia would really be an intriguing fight because size wise, it would both guys would match up well. You know, with Errol Spence. I told this story. I was talking to a journalism class earlier today, and I told the story. We were doing a live preview show for the Keith Thurman Manny. They had Earl Spence come over and join us, and so we were kind of near the stage. Tim, I'll get to your question in a second. Tim Imeson, I see your question. I'll get to it in a second. We were near the stage, and I saw Earl Spence coming over, so I waved him to get to us, and he joined. And the first thing I said to him was, "Man, you look like you're a light heavyweight." He is so much bigger than Manny. I don't know that that's a really fair fight. It would be been better for Manny a couple years ago when he was closer into his prime. But I think right now Errol Spence is so good and he's so big that that's a tough fight for Manny to take. Not that he wouldn't take it because Manny is a warrior and has never ducked anybody. But I don't know that that's the best fight that I would take. Tim Imeson had asked before, when will UFC return? Right now, they're saying May 9th is going to be UFC 249, location TBD. I think there's a good chance, Tim, that fight happens on that date and will go off on May 9th because the government's now starting to open up. There's pressure being put by the administration. President Trump is asking the states to open. And I think, especially in states where there are Republican governors, and Florida is one of them, I think you will see that happen. I think UFC 249 will probably go off as they are planning on May 9th. Unlike the previous UFC 249 that was supposed to be at Tachi Palace in California, and the governor of California, as well as one of the senators, Dianne Feinstein from California, expressed opposition. And the governor actually called the executives at Disney and asked them not to do it. That was a difficult situation. So, Disney just did not want to buck, the wishes of, they're based in California, and you have a very powerful United States senator. You have the governor of the state asking you to do this or asking you not to do this. And so they went to the UFC and said, we're not going to do it. That's not the case this time. Time has changed, and I think that will be the case. Spence versus Crawford, I do think will happen. I don't think it will be the first fight right out of the gate for this reason. I think it should be, but I don't think it will be for this reason. Spence had the accident, and Crawford is very sensitive to the fact he wants to beat Spence and get credit for beating Spence when Spence is at his best. And so he doesn't want to beat Spence first fight out. People say, oh, yeah, he didn't have a fight. He had the accident. He's not the same. He wants Spence to come back and have a fight and beat somebody that the public knows and then fight him so that then there's no question about it. So I do think the fight will happen. I don't think it's going to happen immediately. I think that fight will probably be on hold for a while. So, we'll see that. Probably, I would guess next year would be my guess, because we're almost 5 months into the year now, and so yeah, by the time they get back, it's going to be a while. So I would think it's probably going to be next year, but it could be later this year. But I do think it will happen finally. And had Errol not gotten into that auto accident, I think it would happen now. Another question: should Wilder fight Fury again in a rematch? Well, I'm going to give you two answers to that. I think from his health standpoint and from what is best for him as a boxer standpoint, he should just lay off for a while, not do an immediate rematch, take a lower level fight, work on some things in the gym, and come back. But the only way he could stay in the mix, he had that immediate rematch clause. He had to accept the rematch clause to get the next fight. It is worth so much money. You don't turn down a shot at the heavyweight title either. So it's difficult. So he's going to take the fight because of that reason. He's going to have to change some things up. There's no question. Hey, look, I knew going after the first fight, Fury won almost every round except for the ones that Wilder scored the knockdowns in. Fury was the better boxer. I picked Wilder in the rematch because I thought, well, number one, I knew Fury had had the flu, or excuse me, Wilder had had the flu close to fight week, so he wasn't at his best, and he had also broken his arm. And so I thought, hey, Wilder has room to improve in the rematch, and he would do that. But I was proven wrong. Fury came out and fought a great fight, really adjusted his strategy. I thought did a brilliant job and fought. And now they fought 19 rounds, and Fury has won the vast majority of those rounds. And so when we look at it, we say, what goes on? I think they wait. Let's see. I don't think Wilder will ever get a win over Fury. I'll tell you, Nasruddin, that's going to be a tough one. I think he's got a lot of ground to cover. I think styles make fights, and you look back to the Ali era, and Ali had trouble with Joe Frazier all the time. He had trouble with Ken Norton, and both of those guys would fight Foreman, and Foreman would destroy both of those guys, and then Ali beat Foreman. So it's styles really make fights. I saw another question pop up there. Cecilia Brækhus versus Claressa Shields at 150. Who would win? I'd have to go with Claressa Shields' size. I think Cecilia doesn't have the size to really combat Claressa Shields at this point. I think Cecilia's a skilled fighter. A lighter weight would help her, but Claressa can't make a lighter weight, so I don't think you're going to see that. So I think that would be a Claressa Shields win if they fought at 150, but I don't think Brækhus wants to take that fight, so that won't be there. Anything else, guys? I'll hang in there for a couple more seconds. Remind you again on Saturday, tomorrow, April 18th, ESPN is going to have 11 hours of boxing, classic boxing. It starts noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, and it's going to end in prime time with 3 consecutive Muhammad Ali fights. Ali Frazier 1, Ali Frazier 2, Ali Frazier 3, the Thriller in Manila. And I'll be curious for any of you who have seen all the fights, which is your favorite of the Ali Frazier fights? My favorite, I go back and forth. The best fight, of course, was Ali Frazier 3. Ali Frazier 1 was a tremendous fight. Not as action-packed as Ali Frazier 3, but that was the bigger fight of the two, and both were in their primes, and both were sub 30, both were undefeated. That was really some event. That was not only one of the biggest boxing matches of all time, but one of the biggest sporting events of all time. I mean, the world basically stopped when they fought that night, and it was a Monday night in New York at Madison Square Garden, March 8th, 1971. That was a huge sporting event at the time. So anyways, well, I don't see any more questions, gang, so I am going to let you roll. Thank you for doing this. Put in any comments if you for people you want me to interview. I will be doing those, some on my channel, some on Yahoo Sports, and I appreciate everybody. And we will talk again soon. Have a great day, everyone.